talented vet nurse. Thanks, Claire. A very talented vet nurse, and she was asking me at the Climate and Health Alliance, oh, how can I like bring this into my clinic? And it was awesome to find out about the work for Vets for Climate Action and be able to share that with her. And she's part of the climate care program now and a bit of a champion for it in her workplace. So such important work, and so thrilled to be here. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Wurundjeri country today in Melbourne, and Kaha commits to listening to and learning from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people about how we can better reflect Indigenous ways of being and knowing in our work. I'm now a member of the Climate and Health Alliance. Within the last few weeks, I've sadly finished up there, but I still have a lot of passion for climate and health communication. And on the right of the screen here is the front cover of the WHO Climate Health Communication Toolkit. I'm just going to pop a link in the chat. This is the first such toolkit from the World Health Organization. And even though it is aimed at health professionals focused on human health, there's a lot of relevant information in there that I'm going to share with you tonight that definitely applies to people taking care of the health of our animals and wildlife as well. So why are we here? I know I'm preaching to the converted, but it's part of the whole spiel, so stay with me. Climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. This is not new. It was first said by the World Health Organization in 2007. It was repeated by the Lancet Medical Journal in 2009. Not only is it a very scary, very serious health threat, it is also our biggest opportunity to transform the world into something that's going to be good for our health, with clean air, with resilient infrastructure, with a circular economy, and hopefully with Indigenous ways of being and knowing at the center of it, which really focus on sustainability and healing and connection rather than, you know, one may argue our current way of thinking, which is quite extractionist and about humans dominating. So we've known all these things for a while though, and all the evidence is in. We keep producing more evidence in the hope that it will change minds, but as David Attenborough said, it's not just a scientific challenge. This is not a technical challenge. It's a communications challenge. It's a social challenge. It's a political challenge. I have then just put words in his mouth, but the point is that we have the technical knowledge actually to massively, I'm not saying solve climate change, but to, you know, stay beneath 1.5 degrees. We've had that technology for a long time. And the things that have stopped us is, you know, I guess a sense that this is a problem for 50 years from now. This is a problem that our children will solve. This is a problem that new tech will just take care of us for it. There's no reason to change what we do. And comms has a lot to do with that. And it's not just up to, you know, the scientists to talk about it. It's up to all of us to talk about it. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to go through some top tips for communicating about climate change as a health professional. And I say that broadly. I would count all people who are involved with animal health as health professionals. And I'll go into a little bit why you're a good group of people to do it. I'll do it's actually a shallow dive into storytelling. This is just the beginning, but into why that's important for your work, what not to do when talking about climate change. We'll do a little practical exercise with Slido. So if you have your phone handy, that's helpful, or you can do it in another tab on your browser. We'll set some hopefully practical intentions about how you can roll this out. And then plenty of time for questions. I'm also very into, you know, an interactive session. So feel free to pop things in the chat as we go. And if it links in with what we're talking about, I can respond. Okay, so why this matters is that communication is a public health tool. This was said by Dr. Ed Maybach, who is the kind of global expert on communicating about climate change as a health problem. Every major public health victory of the last century has had effective communication at its heart. In the years leading up to 2020, I sort of had a whole bunch of examples that I would give here, but in the modern era, we've all just experienced one with COVID, so we can see how effective communication around COVID saved lives and how poor communication cost lives, and people were sick and cost well-being and all sorts of ongoing health effects from that. So it's really, really important that we don't see communications as something that someone else does. Everybody takes part in communication in their day-to-day lives, whether they like it or not, and it's good to be good at it. A lot of people then respond to me when I'm working with them, but I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not the one who should be talking about this topic. I'm not the expert. And what I would say to that is climate scientists have been talking about this since the 1970s, and they have been, often the sole voices talking about it. Even if people sort of implicitly supported them, they didn't necessarily come out in support. And it's now at the point where we need all hands on deck. And a lot of us, even though we would think, oh, I don't know much about climate change, I don't know much about climate science, I don't know what the greenhouse effect is, or I know what it is, but I couldn't explain it to someone else, think I'm not the person who should be talking about this. So my main message that I want you to take away from this very early on is that is not the right assumption. Everyone has a role in talking about climate change. And in fact, for many of us, particularly if you're in a position where you're talking to people who trust you, to help with the health of their animal or wildlife, you have a really important role. What I've got on the right here is what I call the 5 facts that you need to know before you talk about climate change. And I've actually added in a 6. So these 6 points have pretty much been proved over and over and over and over again in the last 3 or 4 decades. They've never been disproved. And this is all you need to know before feeling that you know enough climate science to move forward. It's getting warmer. It's us, it's humans, it's caused by humans. Yes, we're sure. We're absolutely sure. It's beyond question at this stage that this is happening and it's caused by humans. It's happening now. In the last 4 years, even since the Black Summer bushfires, a lot of people have come around from this idea that this is a 50-year-old problem, a problem that's 50 years away, to a problem that's happening here and now. But we need to, push that. It's bad. I mean, that's self-explanatory, but the 5th is really important, that we can fix it. A new type of climate denial is coming out. For a long time, it was that it's not happening. Then it was that you can't trust the people who do the science isn't in, we're not 100% sure. Now, the type of science denial you'll hear the most is that it's too late, all these solutions won't help, don't worry about it. That's just a new form of climate denial. So don't be fooled by people who are nihilistic about it. Some people are alarmed and nihilistic, but if you hear it in the media that, oh, these solutions won't work, that is climate denial at its core. Anyway, so we can fix it. All the evidence suggests that we can fix this. So here's why you're uniquely positioned to talk about it once you know those 5 facts. Vets are trusted messengers and have the authority to discuss animal health, well-being, and welfare. Sorry, I'm aware not everyone here is a vet. You might be a vet nurse, you might be involved in another area of animal health, or you might just be interested, or you might be a health professional of some other kind. In any case, if you're in and around the health of humans and or animals, you're absolutely trusted by the community. People see you as a trusted source when it comes to talking about your area of expertise. Health is shown to be a persuasive way to talk about climate change. So there's a lot of evidence that talking about climate change as a human health issue both depoliticizes the issue, because everyone cares about their health. Health is not really seen as a partisan issue, possibly in some other countries, but in Australia, it's a fairly bipartisan issue. And it's not only not partisan, it's also seen as a good way to build support for climate solutions. So I'm talking about renewable energy, active transport, stopping deforestation. Now, when I say this, I do say this around human health. The evidence base around talking about animal health is much smaller, so less robust. But what we do know is that it's still effective to talk about the health of animals to people who care about animals, so the people that you're interacting with. The audience might be slightly smaller. There might be a small number of people who just don't find it as compelling. But the people that you're interacting with, obviously, are self-selecting. They have that bias. So you'll be fine to talk to those people. So I'm hoping that you feel a bit more confident that with the knowledge you have right now, with those top 6 points, and with knowing that you're trusted by people to talk about animal health and the things that are affecting animal health, that you are feeling a little bit more confident that you can be a persuasive climate communicator. Oh, I was supposed to have a thing that said, oh, here we go, top tips of climate health communication. So I'm going to run through 10 tips, and these can be found in that toolkit that I linked earlier that has been produced with the WHO. And not all of these tips you need to apply all the time, but when you're thinking about, hey, I want to talk about climate change, these will hopefully give you some guidance. Before you start, think about who you're talking to and what you want to achieve. I've got a little exercise a bit later, which will help us do this. But if you're talking to a client who's come in with their puppy versus if you're talking to a journalist versus if you're talking to your colleague, the goal of that conversation is likely a little bit different. And you should just think about that before you get started. This second point is kind of considered to be the golden rule of communication, not just for climate and health communication, but for communication in general. Trusted messengers. Simple messages repeated often by trusted messengers are most effective. And you'll probably hear me say that later, because hopefully I'm a trusted messenger, and hopefully it's a simple message that I will repeat often and it will be effective. So what this means is keep your messages short and sharp. If you write the most eloquent essay in the world, that's great, but a tiny amount of people will read it. If you have a short, sharp message, it will get out to a larger amount of people quickly, and then you need to repeat it often so that they will remember it. We've seen this used for evil many a time. Think of all the 3-word slogans you've heard from politicians in the last decade, but we can use it for good. It doesn't have to be as simple as 3 words, but for instance, for me, a simple message that I repeat often is climate change is a health emergency. Another one would be climate action is good for our health. You can see how that might translate into a simple sentence that you start, that when you talk about climate change with that audience, that you can say that same message over and over again. The third thing, focus on animal health. So this is about staying in your area of expertise, and that's because you have a lot of authority to talk about animal health. If someone asks you a question about climate change that is not about animal health, you can say, you know what, I'm not an economist, so I'm not sure about that, but what I know as a vet is extreme heat is affecting the vets I see come into my clinic. Our wildlife are very affected by extreme weather events happening across the continent. Stay in your lane and you'll really protect the trust that people have in you. I just want to shout out to Steph, who's put a few simple messages that you can repeat often to the people that you're talking to in the chat. They're really, really great examples. Understand your local context. So what happens in the Northern Territory is going to be different to what happens in Melbourne and what happens in Perth. So it's about understanding how animals in your area will be affected. It's also about understanding your context of the types of animals you're working with, how people might think about protecting their cats and dogs is very different to how they might consider protecting their livestock, is very different to how they might consider, protecting biodiversity. So thinking about what it is that the animals that you're dealing with, what would affect them, and speaking in that sense. Avoiding jargon. I'd love to give an example of veterinary jargon here. I don't know any. And the point is that if you were talking to me, avoid it. Like, speak to people as if you're talking to them as a 10-year-old. And that's not to be condescending. That's actually better communication than using a whole bunch of technical terms. To show you're a good communicator is not to use fancy words. It's to get your message across without confusion. And a really safe way to do that is to, explain it as if you were talking to sort of a late primary school child. Don't use any jargon. I'm going to go through the next 5 now. So empower people to make good decisions. One of the most important things to maintain our legitimacy as a messenger is making sure that when we give people the information of how, say, climate change will affect their dog, we also give them the information on how to protect their dog. So it's not all, scary, oh my God, this is so bad for everyone, and we're all doomed. It's like, okay, yeah, this is a problem. And in order to adapt, in order to protect yourself and your animals, here's what decisions you need to make. So it's very much about empowering people to make good decisions. Tell stories to connect with people. I'm going to go a little bit into a deep dive about this afterwards. So keep that one in the back of your mind. Avoid polarizing language. Now, this is very specific to your audience. What I mean by this is if you're, a vet in a clinic and you're talking to someone and you don't know their stance on climate change, it's probably best to avoid saying, we're in a climate emergency, because if that person is not engaged, look, if you said that to me, I'd be like, oh my God, I have such a great vet. We get each other. But if you said that to someone who is not, a denier, but just isn't engaged in climate change, they might find that quite confronting. That could either lead them to feel like quite scared, or it could actually lead them to think, oh, this person's exaggerating, and make them feel quite skeptical about what you're saying. So in a clinical setting, it's really good to keep your language, again, quite clinical, fact-based, but, saying things like climate crisis, climate emergency, we're all doomed if we don't do this. Don't do that. It can be, it's not very helpful unless the audience that you're talking to are like, big activists who feel the same way as you, in which case they'll probably love it. This second last one can be controversial, and it was made controversial by our politicians. You've probably heard various examples in the last decade of, a climate disaster happening, and then politicians being asked, what are we doing about climate change? And then our politicians saying, now is not the time to talk about climate change. And that's made a lot of people feel very reticent to talk about climate change during extreme weather events. So flooding, fires. They're like, we need to deal with the here and now, and we can talk about climate change later. That is if you've got that instinct, I understand why you have that instinct. And of course, you should do what you're comfortable with. But talking about climate change during extreme weather events is very effective. It's very salient for your audience. They're thinking about it. And to say to them, you don't have to say this was caused by climate change. What you can say is say, flooding. There was so many effects on animal welfare during the immense floods in Queensland and New South Wales and Victoria in 2022. It's not politicizing to talk about climate change during events like that. It's actually doing this first point, empowering people to make good decisions. If we avoid the science, that's just another form of denialism. By giving people the information they need, they can make good decisions, whether it's about taking care of their animals or whether it's about making better decisions with their energy or voting for better people. You don't have to say any of that. But if you talk about climate change during extreme weather events, people will just pay attention. The last one's really important, and it's really important for protecting you. Don't debate the science. So I've said a few times now, and this goes for simple messages being repeated often, the science is settled. Sometimes when I'm talking to health professionals, they say, what if I get a denier? What if they don't believe me? How am I going to prove that climate change is real? If you come across a climate denier, there is literally nothing. I mean, look, you could just have the most thunderbolt explanation and just change that person's life. But I would say 100 out of 100 times, that person has something going on, and you talking about climate change, you're not going to be the one that shifts them. Unless it's maybe your mum and dad and you have that kind of close personal connection about why climate change matters to you, it's very unlikely that you talking about climate change alone and the facts is going to shift that person. They've had access to the facts. They've had access to a lot of information for a very long time, and they've got something else going on there. Just say, okay, no problem, walk away. That's to protect you from becoming very frustrated, from finding talking about climate change, a really difficult thing to do. The really good news is climate deniers are overrepresented in the media and in the conversations that we talk about. Something like 10% of Australians, according to, we have this amazing thing in Australia called the Climate Compass, which tracks how Australians feel about climate change. And the good thing for Australia is that we've got something like 10% or less people are climate deniers. So, 9 out of 10 times you're going to be talking to someone who is not a climate denier. They're going to maybe be someone who doesn't think about climate change in their day-to-day life. And they're like, oh, it's interesting that the vet or the vet nurse brought it up. Or they're going to be someone who is concerned about climate change, and they're going to feel really validated by you bringing it up as a legitimate issue. So basically, if you get into a situation where you're like, oh my God, this person wants to argue with me, save yourself the headache, just politely walk away. Okay, they were the top 10 tips. You can get these slides after. I'm really quickly going to go through the storytelling and what not to do. And then we can get into a bit of a practical exercise. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope this is useful. So here I said, tell stories to connect with people. A little bit more on this. If this is feeling like, I don't know what you're talking about, it's okay. But if you're someone who's maybe been talking about climate change to people for a while and you're wondering why your stats aren't connecting with them, it's because there are so many statistics out there about climate change that and actually people are not designed to remember numbers and statistics. People, for millennia have been telling each other stories and passing each other facts and science via stories. And so what you can do if you've got an example in your work of how climate change has affected a client or an animal or even your colleagues' experience, telling that story of something that happened to like one animal or one person can be very powerful. it feels like, okay, that could be like a one-off experience, and it's not scientifically valid, but it creates an emotional connection between you and the person you're talking to, and it creates an emotional connection between that person and the reality of climate change. And that means that humans actually can then expand that. It's like, oh my God, if that's happening to this animal, what's happening to all the animals? So if you're finding that sharing facts and figures is not getting you anywhere, storytelling is kind of like leveling up on your communication. It's a really good way to go. And if you tell a story, tell the story first and then be like, and that's true for a lot of animals. Here are the stats. Yeah, so that's a bit of an upskill if you're really confident with this stuff. Really quick things, what not to do. Don't guess the science. If you don't know how the greenhouse gas effect works, just say so. If you're not quite sure what the deal is with methane and why people are talking about it, just say that. It's fine. You're an expert in what you're an expert in, and you only need to be an expert in that. Don't need to be a climate expert. And you can either say, I think I can get you that information, or you can say, you know what, I'm not sure about this, but here's what I know. Come back to your simple message. Climate change is affecting the health of animals right now. Be careful during a crisis about ambulance chasing. I put this later because I know what I said about talking about it extreme weather. There probably is a line. If you feel like you're being exploitative, you probably are being exploitative. You don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. But talking to people about the reality is good, but trying to kind of emotionally manipulate people is not. I don't think anybody here would do that, but just I should warn, don't move too far away from the area of expertise. So yeah, stick to what you know. And this hopefully goes without saying, but there's a lot of information out there, and we're a very, unfortunately, probably due to social media, we're a very divided population, and it's not helpful to put other people down if they have different beliefs to you. So even it could be, calling people cookers, which is, people who are conspiracy theorists, but it could also be as like, a friend that you love and respect, doesn't really know much about climate change or doesn't care about climate change. Don't put them down. Act really compassionate. There's a lot of reasons why up to this point people haven't necessarily engaged in climate change, and that doesn't make them ignorant. It's been a very politicized space for a really long time, and if we shame people, we're not going to get everyone on board that we need to get on board. So yeah, that's my slides. I hope that was useful. I've got a little bit of an interactive exercise. So I'm just going to go into it. But if you've got any questions as we go, like feel free to just put them in the chat. We also do have like a dedicated thing for questions at the end. But what I'm going to ask you to do is go to Slido. I hope some of you may have used Slido before. What I'm going to do is put a link in the chat. Otherwise, if you're on your phone, or if you want to use your phone for this, you can go to slido.com and they will ask you to enter a code, which is here. And what we're going to do with this quick exercise is basically help you to imagine if you were thinking about, I'm actually going to like use this toolkit. I'm actually going to go out and talk to people I know about climate change. What you would do. So the first question, what type of animal health professional are you? I was talking to Claire earlier. I was like, it's a generic term for people who work with animal health. But yeah, if you could put your answer in there, and then I'll present it to you all as a word cloud. I've actually not used Slido before, so I'm going to do it too. And I'm not even sure what you're seeing, but let's give it a go. Okay, cool. So hopefully you're seeing a word cloud. In fact, why don't I just present it? present. Sorry, being so slow. Okay, I've got it now. Sorry, I've now gone to the wrong tab. Here we go. Okay, so we've got some animal lovers. We've mostly got vets, so great to know. And it would have been actually good for me to do this first so I could target what I was saying closely to the people who were in the room. But awesome. So we've got mostly vets, an animal lover, a vet nurse educator, an agricultural consultant, people interested in One Health. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And the reason I've asked you this is because depending on who you are is kind of gonna affect the type of messages you give to people. So if you can think about yourself, hey, this is who I am and what that means to other people, that's great. I'm gonna launch the next question now. How do I do that? Okay, so you should have a new question there. What impacts of climate change have you noticed? And I'm kind of talking about what you've noticed at work here. I'm going to leave this one for a little bit longer because sometimes there's a lot of impacts. You can, write whatever you would like. Dehydrated wildlife. Cool. So feel free to keep adding to that. Vets, Steph and Claire, if any of this is useful for like your comms, I'm very happy to send you the slider results later. I love collecting data and being like, oh my gosh, so interesting what people say. But I mean, I'm seeing a lot for extreme heat, and I'm not surprised. For humans, extreme heat is definitely the most deadly health effect of climate change, and I imagine it's the same for animals. Diseases, yep, I'm not surprised either. And floods, yeah. As someone who's not an expert in the area of like veterinary health, I'm not surprised by these answers at all. These are the ones I tend to see crop up in the media. Ehrlichiosis, yeah, I don't know what that is, but I bet it's bad. Thank you for sharing. So the reason I wanted you to share that is because hopefully connecting who you are and what impacts you're seeing does a couple of things. It helps you to realize, hey, I could legitimately talk about what my experience is, and I have something to talk about. So for instance, I, as a vet, have seen the impacts of extreme heat on animals, and that makes me qualified to talk about it. If you don't feel qualified, it's fine, no pressure, but you in your position have a lot of power to talk about what you're seeing. The next thing I'm going to do, it's the last bit of the exercise, and then I'm going to give you a minute to kind of set an intention about your next step before we go to questions, is I'm just going to share screen and show something else really briefly. This is the toolkit I was talking about earlier, which was launched literally last Friday. It's very fresh. And I'm really proud to be a lead author on this toolkit about how to communicate climate change and health. I put it in the link in the chat, but I really recommend reading through this. It's got a lot of relevant tips for you implementing this into your own work. And what we're going to do is just look at one page. This page, let me zoom in. And this is what I was talking about in my first tip of the 10 of the, I don't know, the top tips of talking about climate change and health was about considering your audience and goal. And the reason is that often when I talking about climate change and health, people have someone in mind. They might have their clients in mind. They might be thinking about talking to their colleagues about it, or their brother and sister about it, or you might be more, you've got a bit of an activist bone in you that you're like really looking to hone. You might be like, I want to go talk to politicians and decision makers. I want to talk to journalists about my experience, as an agricultural specialist, seeing what it does to crops and wildlife, right? So there are all different people that you might want to talk to climate change and health about. And what I want to know is what we know from research is that if you can envision who you want to talk to and why, that you're much more likely actually to go off and do it. It's the kind of first step to actioning it. So sorry for forcing you to like already embedded in your mind how you're going to use this information. But what I'd like you to do is looking at this list, and you might have a different audience who you're interested in talking to, but I'm going to ask you, like, looking at this list, who are the people you're most interested in talking to climate change first? Like, who do you think is the people that you're going to get the most, like you're going to be able to give the most to? So I'm going to open this new question. It's a forced multiple choice of these options. I didn't include patients, even though you're welcome to talk to your cats and dogs about it if you like. Yeah, so who here is like the most compelling for you that you think you want to go out and talk to? I also didn't offer no one, because everyone has someone that they can talk to about this stuff. Yeah. How many people do we have? We have 15 people, so I'll wait for a couple more answers. So we're getting a lot for friends and family. And what I'll say about friends and family is that there was a group called Climate for Change. I think they're still around, even though they've had a few changes in the last few years. But they did some research, and sorry, not just their research, broader research shows that talking to friends and family is another example of you being a trusted messenger in a very different way. You're trusted because of the personal connection you have to those people. And it's very, very effective for one-on-one conversations. Talking as a brother or sister or child or parent or a friend is a wonderful, wonderful way to get people to care about climate change, because if you talk about why you care about climate change, that's going to help them to care about climate change. We've also got a lot of people saying broader community. That's really interesting. That could be something like going out to, climate events and talking as a vet. It could also be about going as a vet to animal events and talking about climate change. It's great that you guys want to go out and do that. Policymakers, awesome. So that could be through submissions, that could be through direct meetings. So yeah, there's a lot of different people you could talk to about climate change. And what I'm going to ask you to do for 1 minute before we go to Q&A is to now go to the chat and think about what is the first action I can take to make that a reality. So I'll just give a really quick example. If I'd picked colleagues, or if I'd picked my boss, for instance, the first action I could take is, I'm going to say 2 actions. I could get in touch with Vets for Climate Action saying, hey, can you give me some info that I can share with my colleagues? And the second action I would take is contacting the person who's doing the next team meeting and saying, hey, can I have 5 minutes to talk about this thing that I learned about in a PowerPoint presentation. So what I'm going to get you all to do is go to the chat. Don't press enter yet. Think about the audience that you want to talk about climate change with, and then think about like 1 or 2 actions you can take to move forward to talk to those groups. And I'll get you all to press enter at the same time. It'll make me so sad if no one has anything to enter, so don't make me feel sad. I'll give you 30 more seconds. Awesome. So what I'll get you all to do is on the count of 3, if you just press enter, and everyone's actions will pop into the chat at the same time. And then you'll be accountable to going forth and doing them. So 1, 2, 3, press enter. Oh, amazing. So good. Create a proposal and request a meeting. Find out the most common right-wing media denial messages. Oh, Claire Death. Feel free to hit me up because that sounds so interesting. Rebecca wants to talk to her colleagues about how clinics might become more sustainable. Obviously, Vets for Climate Action can massively help you with that. Anna, I love it, going straight for activists, blocking coal ships. Yeah, good luck. Love that. Amazing work. So I hope that all of you now feel like maybe you've done a little bit of thinking about how you might be able to talk about climate change in your work. This is obviously just a little taste. I put the WHO publication in there. If anyone wants to get in touch with me about any of this, I'm just going to put my email in the chat, and I'll also just put Kaha's thing in there so that if you're interested in the Climate and Health Alliance, you can go and check it out. And that's it. I'll just pass back to Claire. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Remy. I feel like on behalf of everyone, that was an amazing presentation, very insightful. I'm just going to hand over if there is any questions. I would just read out a question that came up in our chat, first of all, from William. How to deal with differences in thoughts about the feasibility of decoupling between growth and carbon emissions?
What a good question, William. It's $1 million question. I think what I would say first is that the good assumption that underlies this question is that the person you're talking to believes that carbon emissions is a problem and that something needs to be done about it. So we're now in the space of like how to talk about solutions. And in this space, you're going to have a lot of kind of green capitalist people, and you're also going to have a lot of people who are like down with capitalism. And I'm not going to give my personal opinion on any of that. You know, we've all got them. But the best way I find to deal with differences in thoughts about this, but also any differences in thoughts, is to kind of establish a shared value, right? So the person that you're talking to, it sounds like if they care about reducing carbon emissions, why is that? Is that because they have kids and they're worried about that? Is that because they are worried about the future of our wildlife? Is that because they just think it's an amazing economic opportunity for Australia to be a renewable energy superpower? Kind of diving into like what it is that they care about, and then when we get and connecting with that and creating like a safe space to talk about why they care about it. That's really, really important. Now, the second thing about the feasibility of, you know, like when there's a difference in opinion and of approach, my advice would be to have that conversation, have it very respectfully, be honestly open to listening to them and as you'd like them to honestly listen to you. And it's not necessarily about changing that person's mind in that moment. It's just about making sure that both perspectives are heard. And you might find that they come back to you. You know, I'm not going to make an assumption about which side of that coin you might sit on, but if we can have respectful conversations, we're more likely to meet somewhere in the middle. And that's just good for our democracy even just to have the conversation without yelling at each other on a Facebook comment section. So yeah, dealing with differences in thoughts is a great problem to have, as long as you can deal with it respectfully and not get like fired up.
No. Thank you, Remy.
That's a great line, Steph. Get curious before you get furious. I'll take that.
Did anybody else have any other questions for Remy?
I'm super happy if anyone has any questions of like, oh, I want to talk to this audience, but I don't know how, or anything like that. I'm also happy to help with stuff like that.
We've got a question from Claire in the chat, how to talk to older people that don't think it's their problem.
Okay. So something I would say about this is that I've done a lot of, work in the climate space, both on the volunteer side, both, in the paid work side. And it is an incorrect assumption that older people don't care about climate change. If you look at people who got, say a lot of the Teals elected on a climate platform, it's really interesting actually when you go to climate, people who really care about climate and volunteer their time, it's very generally young people and then older people, because they got free time. The people in the middle are usually like bringing up a family or traveling for work, and they often don't have the time to contribute to the action. So that being said, young people are in general a lot more concerned than older people are. And so a frame that you can use there is not necessarily trying to convince them that it's their problem. It's explaining to them in like really compassionate terms why it's your problem and why it makes you scared for your future. They'll be able to see their experience through that. Again, if they're just like, oh, I don't care, I'm going to be dead by then, that person's probably not your top priority to convince anyway. Like that person's already made a decision. And if they're that selfish, like, don't give yourself the headache. It's fine if people can't be convinced. It's not on you to convince them. Move on to someone else who really does want to talk about it, because a lot of people want to talk about it but think no one else wants to talk about it. Do you want me to just
if you can you can see them.
Yeah. So, William, this is a pretty controversial question. I'm definitely not going to go into the full thing, but I would refrain from saying this is China's fault. It's kind of misinformation that has led to us being able to feel okay about our own consumption when others in the developing world, very much are trying to catch up. It's really important for people in developed countries to recognize that, our per capita consumption is massive, and it's on governments and it's on the fossil fuel companies. Like, we don't have to deal with like it's these people's fault. It's something like 100 fossil fuel companies are responsible for like 75% of the world's emissions. If you're going to blame someone, just blame fossil fuel companies, because nobody likes them. So it's really easy to do. It's less controversial. How do we talk to the rural community that are being fed a lot of misinformation? This is such a good question. Australia is such an urban population. And we all, myself included, I'm a full city girl. I lived in Sydney, now I live in Melbourne. It's, I have this bias and I often can overlook it. And I was very lucky at the Climate and Health Alliance to work with people who were remote and regional, so that I could be given those different perspectives. So the first thing I would do is if you're a city person and you don't know how to talk to someone who's regional or remote or rural, is you've got some family, you've got people in your network who do have that perspective. Talk to them, ask them about their experience. Really, the first step usually for good communication, if you're talking on that one-to-one level, is to listen first. Listen without judgment, help them to feel heard. And often the first conversation might not be like, sometimes it takes sustained conversation. in terms of them being a rural community, this is about really understanding the local context. So, you know, if I'm talking about, I can't just transfer the information I have from my inner city section and go out to Mildura and talk about it. Like, it's really important that I understand the local context, and if I can, find a trusted messenger who's from the rural community. So we talked about trusted messages. Repeating simple messages often is most effective. And I did tell you I would repeat that, so to try and help you remember it. If you go into a rural community as, you know, a city vet, you know, I'm not totally sure, but I can imagine that someone who is seen as a local is going to be a more trusted person in that scenario. So it's not about your ego. It's not about like your own skills. Often it's just like finding the right messenger and working closely with that messenger and letting them deliver the message and being around for questions. But the trust in the person who's delivering the message is paramount. So if there's someone who's in a better position than you to deliver that message, always like give them the stage, because that's actually what's going to get us the best result. I think that's all I can see.
Yeah, there's just a few quotes in there for people. Yeah, I think that's good. Did anyone else have any more questions they want to pop in before we wrap up and thank Remy for her time?
Can I just jump in, Claire and Remy, just to point out that in relation to that question about rural communities, is that we actually have a program appropriately titled the Rural and Regional Program, which is engaging with and looking to identify trusted communicators within their communities who can take on that role. So if you feel like you know someone or are someone, please do reach out, because we'd love to hear from you, because we totally agree that that within your community, you are best placed. Someone with lived experience and that deep understanding can play a really crucial role.
Totally agree. It's great that you have that program. Amazing.
Perfect. If there's nothing else, I think we can wrap up. But I'd just like to say on behalf of everyone, Remy, thank you so much. That was extremely informative and very valuable information that we've taken from tonight. And I just want to let everyone know that if you do have any further questions, Remy's put her email in the chat as well, and as well as our contact information as well if you want to follow up. I will be following up with uploading this recording to YouTube as well as our website, and I will attach the link to Remy's article and the slides for this presentation as well. But on behalf of Vets for Climate Action and everyone that attended tonight, thank you so much, Remy. That was actually unreal. And yeah, really appreciate your time. So thank you. And thank you everyone else for attending.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Remy. Really appreciate that tonight. That was fantastic. And wishing you all a very lovely and safe long weekend.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.